For Cybercrime Radio, I'm Amanda Glassner, Deputy Editor at Cybercrime Magazine. Joining me today is Heather Engel, Managing Partner at Strategic Cyber Partners. Welcome, Heather.
Hi, Amanda. Thanks for having me.
So, password managers are very popular, and for good reason. I use one, a lot of people I know use one. But they have been in the news recently for a more concerning reason. According to Ars Technica, the promise that these platforms can't see your password vaults isn't always true. Heather, can you tell us more about this?
Sure. So for years, password managers have really marketed themselves as zero knowledge. And what this means is that they claim even if a hacker broke into their system or their servers, they wouldn't see your password. The attacker wouldn't be able to see your passwords because the password manager doesn't hold the key. In other words, this is your master password. So the reality check here is that researchers recently proved that this is not an absolute promise. And they found that if an attacker, for example, or a rogue employee were to gain full control of the password manager's servers, they can perform active attacks. So instead of just trying to break the encryption, they can manipulate the software that your computer or your phone receives. So as an example, when you log in or you sync your vault, a compromised server could send your app a modified set of instructions that would downgrade your encryption or trick your app into leaking the key during a password reset. And so, in short, if the server is compromised or the server is malicious, the vault is no longer a safe. There are vulnerabilities there.
Now, researchers specifically named Bitwarden, Dashlane, and LastPass, but what should users of these services be thinking right now? Is it a situation where people should just consider switching providers, or is it more about understanding the risks so that we can use the tools safely?
Yeah, this is really a question of risk, right? There are so many users out there who are attached to a password manager, and if they're trying to switch, it's something that is just going to not happen or they're going to stop using it altogether. So you don't necessarily have to jump ship. There's a couple things to think about, right? First of all, the attacks require a provider's entire server infrastructure to be compromised, or a good portion of it. And so that's a high bar, right? It's not an absolute. We're not saying that that would never happen, but you have to look at the overall risk of that happening. The second is that a lot of these vulnerabilities exist because of convenience features like account recovery, vault sharing, in some cases, legacy support for older devices. So if you want a system that can reset your password if you lose it, you're inherently giving that system some sort of access. So these are all just some things to keep in mind. Finally, you can look at potentially using a local-only manager where the database lives on your computer and it never touches a cloud server. So that eliminates the risk. But again, if you were to lose your hard drive, then that adds a little bit of a risk there. So the verdict here, I think, is don't panic and delete your account. You could consider turning off account recovery, but then again, you've turned off account recovery. So if you forget your your master password, that puts you in somewhat of a conundrum. And as with everything software related, keep your apps updated. And if you're really concerned, or sometimes what I'll do with my passwords is I almost assign them levels. So like this is a level 1 password for financial or really important stuff. A level 3 password maybe lets me log into the New York Times, but I'm not that worried about it. And so you could potentially also say, all right, I'm going to put my level 1 passwords on a local password manager where there's no risk of that cloud issue, and create some backup copies of it. Depends on how far you want to go with password management. And all users, just like all the companies that we work with, have different risk tolerance levels. And so it's really a question of how much time and effort do you want to invest in this.
Yeah, that's a great point. I always make fun of my parents actually because they keep a book of their most important passwords, like literally
Right.
handwritten. But maybe in this case, they're ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and it's not a bad idea to do something like that, especially for some of your passwords. Let's say, for example, we talk a lot about estate planning with some of our clients. And if you have couples and one half of the couple were to pass away, do you have access to that other person's passwords and bank accounts and things like that? And if you use a password manager like this, you may not. So it's never a bad idea to keep some additional records maybe that are offline. And if you have a book of passwords, you definitely don't have a risk of your cloud services being compromised.
Right. You make a great point there. Now, Zooming out a little more broadly, it seems like any online service, whether it be a password manager, like in this case, but also banks, email addresses, mobile providers, they all carry some level of risk. And as our lives become increasingly digital, what advice would you give consumers who are trying to protect themselves?
The goal is not zero tolerance or zero risk, it's risk management. So, what level are you comfortable with? We already said you can take things offline, you can use a local password manager. Some other things that you can consider: hardware. You can use a physical security key, like YubiKey is one. That's much more common in organizational multi-factor authentication scenarios than it is in personal. But again, that would be another option. And then our advice is to always ask as if your data will eventually be leaked. So you're using multi-factor authentication on everything. If you treat a password as just one of the two keys needed to enter the house, it becomes a nuisance rather than a catastrophe. And so again, it goes back to those risk management tips.
Heather, thank you as always. I'm looking forward to catching up again soon.
Thanks.
For Cybercrime Radio, I'm Amanda Glassner, Deputy Editor at Cybercrime Magazine. To hear more about this story and others, visit our website at cybercrimewire.com. And for more of our media, visit cybersecurityventures.com.